What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Scouting the Fins right here on the 3 Yards Per Carry Podcast Network, part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. This show is brought to you by 305-800-PAIN. Just like the Dolphins kick off the season, you need to be ready too. After an accident, your first move should be calling 305-800-PAIN. Better Business Bureau accredited with an A+ rating. Your car accident, personal injury specialist. Fast connection with trusted doctors and attorneys. Always ready to take your call 24/7. Again, 305-800-PAIN, 305-800-PAIN. I'm your co-host today, Hussam Patel, and joining me is Coach and Eric. Gentlemen, the Dolphins finally have a dub in the column. They're 1-3, going on the road to face the Carolina Panthers. Eric, we missed you in the post-game show. What were your initial thoughts on that game?
So my initial thoughts were, firstly, speedy recovery to Tyreek Hill. Obviously, you hate to see anything like that happen, and especially for a guy who I think very quietly in the last couple of games was starting to round back into form a little bit for the offense. But, I think offensively there was a lot of really interesting stuff that kind of happened. Number one, I think you saw a renewed commitment to the run game. I liked a lot of what they did on the rollouts with Tua. I think we saw a lot more of that this past week. Defensively, I think it's a little bit of another story. I still kind of walk away from this game feeling like at least a little bit like the Jets kind of gave it away with some of the fumbles and just some of the penalties that they committed. But the Dolphins, to their credit, were able to take advantage of those. My biggest regret is that in that third quarter, it really felt like the Dolphins had a chance to kind of put them away, and they just couldn't do it. But I think the addition of Darren Waller to the offense opens up some really interesting possibilities. And I think that the Tyreek Hill injury, while unfortunate, could have some unintended consequences that might actually. I think there are ways you can talk yourself into certain things happening that might not be the worst case scenario for the Dolphins offense post Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I agree. You talked about the commitment to the run game and felt like they definitely did that. There was a good piece put out there by Tyler DeSena earlier about the Darren Waller touchdown on the crossing route. There was the boot action. And on that drive, they ran the ball 3-4 times. That was the same drive that Tyreek got injured on. But it wasn't necessarily that they were running the ball great on those drives. It was just they were running it consistently, and they had run 2 outside zones to the left before that touchdown pass, and then they roll 2 out, and he hits Darren Waller. So, we talk about being able to stretch the field both vertically and horizontally. That's where that really comes in. And like you said about getting into a position to put the Jets away and not being able to do it. When they went up there with that touchdown, it was 17-3. And then the next drive was that Justin Fields scramble that brought it back to 17-10. Whereas, if you make that stop there and you score again, then I don't want to say put it in cruise control for the rest of the game, but makes the rest of the game, a lot smoother for the Dolphins. So that's something to look forward to. If we get into that position again, can the Dolphins actually close the door?
So go ahead, Sam. Sorry about that.
You're
no, because I had a thought that kind of really I find interesting, and maybe this is something that we can talk about more as we talk about how the Panthers are going to defend the Dolphins. But I guess to kind of just get into kind of what I hinted at with the whole Tyreek Hill and some of the unintended consequences, I kind of had the thought, Tyreek Hill put so much pressure on defenses, and he was, obviously the biggest threat that the Dolphins offense had to offer. I kind of feel like at a fundamental level, losing Tyreek Hill also kind of changes the way defenses are going to play the Dolphins in a way that might actually, in an odd way, open the vertical passing game back up. Because I just don't think that they're going to be as sold out to stop it as they were with Tyreek Hill, who's obviously a threat to take the top off the defense every time he's on the field.
And you're not wrong about that take, right? And the stats back that up. Miami's offense has faced the most two high shells in the league since 2024, at least from what I can remember. Through 4 weeks of this NFL season, Miami's offense has faced once again the most two high shells at a 61% rate. If we're talking about just specifically this game itself, Carolina, they play too high at around a 36%. If Tyreek Hill was here, I would assume they'd be playing that at least 40 to 50% of the time. Now, with Tyreek Hill out, I think you might see a change from too high to maybe one high to stop that running game, but you still have the deep threat of Waddle. Now, in the lone, games that Tyreek Hill was out, Jalen Waddle had 6 receptions for 120 yards, and I believe a touchdown or 2 touchdowns, and it was up against the Jets. With Tua Tagovailoa in 2021, Jalen Waddle was a 1,000-yard receiver. He was wide receiver 1. He could take those short, he could take those intermediate routes, he could gain yak, and he was also the deep ball guy as well. I don't see so much of the offensive structure changing so much. I see more so where the defenses are not necessarily in that too high shell anymore. They're coming down a little bit to stop that run. And here's where the play action piece goes into it. Now, if you're Mike McDaniel, you are committing to running the ball a little bit more with Devon Achane, with Ollie Gordon, and hopefully Jalen Wright as well in that 11 personnel with Darren Waller, or if it's 21 or even 22 personnel, which we saw that first Darren Waller touchdown be, that has the potential to have, an explosive aspect, whether you're throwing intermediate to Darren Waller on a crosser or you're throwing a deep out or a deep pass against single high coverage to Jalen Waddle. That may, have an effect where the explosiveness of the Dolphins offense could finally be back.
Yeah, and I just wanna add to that as well, just with Darren Waller. He doesn't move like a guy that's broken down. I've seen players that are broken down and have just had their athleticism sapped by injury. And Darren Waller doesn't look like that. Like, he's still creating separation. He's beating guys off the line of scrimmage in a way that makes me curious as to what he can do, when he does stretch the field a little bit more vertically versus, a little bit more of what we saw in terms of the horizontal game and down in the red zone Monday night versus the Jets.
Coach, I'm interested in your thoughts because we saw the Dolphins be under center a lot more after Tyreek Hill went down. They're only under center about 20% of the time. Remaining is usually shotgun. Now, they don't really run much running plays out of shotgun. It's primarily passing plays. But when they are under center in terms of their EPA for the pass and the run overall in the offense, they are the 9th best offense in terms of that, in terms of running under center compared to just shotgun itself. Do you think we see more under center runs? Do you think we see more under center passes? And will that help the offensive line pick up some pressures and in turn help out, the rookie Jonas Avenaya and our right guard Cole Strange?
Yeah, I think that when you're under center, it allows you to be a little less predictable, right? And if you go back to, basically back to wing T principles, under center wing T, a big part of that is deception, in the idea that when the quarterback is turning his back to the defense, that he can hide the ball and the defense can't necessarily see. You saw Peyton Manning excel at that. And, the way they talked about how much he worked on his play fakes, making those look identical. In the past, it feels like Miami has kind of tried to lean on Tua to, get up there to the line to figure things out, and usually not giving him enough time to do it. But it felt like this past week was more a return back to the core of that Shanahan offense, where you are under center, you're running those wide zones where the quarterback is opening up at a 45-degree angle and getting out to the running back. And the effect of that is that the defense has to flow with that. And when they're doing that, it gives the ability to boot out of that, and it creates some easy opportunities. I think that's kind of where we saw the difference. We've seen them try to give the play fake to the outside zone out of the gun or the pistol and tried to leak that tight end out into the flat, and it just hasn't been as effective. But if you go back to that second Darren Waller touchdown, not only was Darren Waller wide open, Julian Hill was wide open as well. So I think that, without Tyreek Hill and without the need to feed him and worry about those targets, I think you can go back to a little more of those basic concepts of the Shanahan system, where you are under center more and you're working on more of those mismatches and less predictability in terms of what you're doing. So I think that we should see that continue to increase and, see a more even mix of under center versus shotgun.
I think with it being under center, it might help with the emotions now, especially up against Carolina. Carolina is the 27th ranked defense when it comes to defending against motions. The Dolphins run motion at the second highest rate. Carolina plays single high at a 60% rate, which is the eighth highest. In Carolina's defense, especially playing that much single high, they are the 32nd ranked defense in terms of pressure rate. I think that should bode well for this Dolphins offense and this passing game to get going, whether it be from under center, whether it be those RPOs from shotgun, maybe even from 21 personnel. But here's the thing, these Carolina linebackers are not good in terms of pass rushing or even covering the middle of the field. Miami, when they do throw middle of the field, which this year they're the 30th ranked team, the 30th, they're the team who runs basically the third least. I'm sorry, I'm just having a word salad right here. But they run the second least amount of passes being thrown into the middle of the field because of that too high, because the linebackers are dropping back. Carolina's defense, middle of the field open rate, 29th of all defenses. I think that's Miami's bread and butter right there. Spamming middle of the field, throwing those crossers to Waddle, throwing those slants, those crossers or those drags over to Darren Waller on those play action boot concepts. Maybe even, Texas routes to Devon A-Chain. That is going to be the staple for Miami to at least get the ball moving up against this Carolina defense.
Yeah, I mean, we thought the Dolphins had issues with getting to the quarterback in terms of their pass rush. And Carolina, not only are they 32nd in pressure rate, I mean, they've got 2 sacks through 4 games. Not only are they not even creating the pressure, even when they are, they're not getting the quarterback down on the ground. And so I think when you look at it, it really creates a situation for this Dolphins offense where, Tua's going to be, I think in this game, you can say he's going to be relatively clean. Number one. And then number two, I think when you run a little bit more of that traditional Shanahan style where, you are under center a little bit more often and you do create that unpredictability, it allows for, the Mike McDaniel Dolphins have had a lot of very strong tendencies over the last year and a half, 2 years. Very strong tendencies. And I think being put in a position where they're going to have to break some of those tendencies, it's just going to be a good kind of shock to the offense a little bit. As Hassan mentioned, I think the middle of the field is kind of going to return for the Dolphins because, as mentioned, not only does Carolina run a lot of single high, now, you don't have the threat of Tyreek Hill seemingly, so you're going to double down on that. You're not going to feel pressured to we have to play 2 shell because we have Tyreek Hill on the other side. So they're going to feel a little bit more empowered to do that, and I think that's going to be where Miami can kind of really take advantage and lean into what Tua does very well in terms of his accuracy on his timing routes and those in breakers and kind of getting back to, the 2022, 2023 kind of passing game for the Dolphins.
And I think that in terms of attacking the middle of the field, that feels like that's where the replacement of the Tyreek snaps is going to come from. I mean, Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill were both already playing a high percentage of snaps, so you're not going to see a huge uptick in the number of snaps that Waddle's playing. Even Malik Washington is at like 55% already, so there's not a huge amount of room to move up there. So the players that I feel like are going to replace that on the field, whether it's in the 21 personnel or the 11 personnel, you're looking at the Nick Westbrook-Akinis, you're looking at the Darren Wallers. Those are more of your seam threats, the guys that are going to catch those balls more over the middle. So I think this is never going to have good timing for Tyreek Hill to go down, right? But if you are looking at how you're going to replace him and you're going to use those kind of middle of the field type receivers, then Carolina is a great opportunity to figure out how you can replace those targets.
Yeah, and look, this isn't a knock on Carolina's secondary. Like, they have decent players. They have Trevon Moehrig as one of their starting safeties. They have J.C. Horn as their starting cornerback. But let's move on to the run game here, Coach, with this Dolphins offense. We were talking a little bit more about them running a little bit more inside zone in between the tackles. They run inside 45% of the time, a little bit more of a balance, not as much as um, you know they did pre McDaniel, but with this McDaniel offense, it's usually 60 or 40 or 70-30 outside inside. This season it's like 55-45. A little bit of a change maybe because of the guards that they have. But in terms of advanced metrics, when they run the ball inside in between the tackles, they're the seventh best team. They run outside zone at the seventh highest metric. They're 11th in terms of outside EPA. They're running the ball very efficiently, but they're not seeing a lot of light boxes.
Yeah, I think that the strength of what the Dolphins' offensive line is right now does not mesh well with what McDaniel would like to do ideally, right? McDaniel wants to run that outside zone, but when you look at going from Austin Jackson to Larry Borum, like Borum is a solid run blocker, but not necessarily a solid outside zone run blocker in terms of the athleticism to get out there. You've gone to Cole Strange now at right guard, who is decently athletic, right? But the reps that I've seen with him running outside zone, there's still a lot to be desired there. But we saw a run late in the game versus the Jets, which was an inside zone, getting more vertical, where Cole Strange, did a combo up to the linebacker, sealed it, and Achane ran for 20 plus or whatever. And then Jonah has not done well on the move, right? There's balance issues there for whatever reason, whether it's hand placement, foot placement, just weight distribution. But when he's been able to get vertical, he's been able to create movement. And Patrick Paul, he's been very good this year. I don't want to say much better in pass protection, but there's been almost no issues with pass protection. And this past week when I was grading, where all of his negative snaps came in the run game for him. And some of that, again, was trying to get out in space a little bit. And part of that could be the guard that he's playing with. But, we've seen the combination of him and Jonah be able to get into a defensive tackle and blow him back 5-6 yards off the ball and then, leave for a linebacker. So I think that when we're looking at what this team is able to do well now, you've got to continue to lean on that inside stuff and take advantage of what you can do versus what you want to do in a perfect world, because it's definitely the Dolphins' offensive line right now is far from a perfect world.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead and end on this. Carolina's defensive line, even though they have Derek Brown, that's not a good run defense there.
Yeah.
In terms of light box EPA and how much they run their light boxes, they run it at almost 70%, but they actually do really well when they play those light boxes. The only thing is that those safeties really do crash down and are kind of fast getting down to the line of scrimmage. The other thing is that the Carolina Panthers defensive coordinator, Jiro Evero, he also takes his defensive backs to blitz to crash down in the run game, kind of like what Anthony Weaver does and what he said in his press conference. They are 26th in EPA up against outside runs. They are 24th in EPA in terms of inside runs given up. So that is an inefficient run defense, kind of like the Miami Dolphins run defense. And on that, we will go to break. And we're back. The Dolphins defense, guys, it's been bad. Albeit what we thought was going to be a weak point is not a weak point, and what we thought was going to be a strong point is not a strong point. It's like Freaky Friday just happened, and the two units just completely switched.
Yeah, it's so frustrating for me watching this defensive line, because it really does make me wonder about it. And to be like, I fully expect at some point this season, I don't know if it's this week, I don't know if it's next week, I don't know if it's in December, at some point the light bulb is going to go off and we're all going to sit here asking where they've been since the start of the season.
Does
At
Jalen
some point
Hurts have a sack yet, Eric?
he does not. But at some point I believe it's going to happen. He's going to get there. He is winning reps. He's just not getting to the quarterback right now.
Do the Dolphins have an interception yet, Eric?
They do not. They do not. They have forced quite a few fumbles, though.
Only up against the New York Jets, Eric.
Well, you can't pick your opponents. My point being is a lot of the stuff that's going wrong with the defensive line, particularly along the inside, it almost makes me wonder what they were doing in the lead up to this season, because I'm watching really simple things. I'm watching Kenneth Grant get blown up because he's doing a really bad job of getting leverage and being the lower man. He's getting blown up a lot. The same thing has happened to Zach Sealer a few times. Now, don't get me wrong, Zach Sealer kind of came alive a little bit in the second half versus the Jets. He had a few of those TFLs where he just kind of knifed through the line and got to the running back. And I think, like I said, I think we're going to get to a point this season where we start to see the defensive line play well, and we're just, why did it take so long? And I can't really answer that question. It just kind of makes me wonder what they were doing throughout the preseason. But the defense itself is not great. And I don't really know how I can preface that. I think what scares me right now the most is not only Chuba Hubbard, because I think that he's one of the league's underrated running backs, but in terms of your ability to contain the middle of the field in the short passing game, Hunter Renfrow might catch 15 passes on Sunday.
Yeah. I wish that I could pinpoint one specific thing that we could sit here and say we got to do that better and that this defense is going to be great. But the issues have been all over the place, right? And a lot of that coming in the front seven. You talked about what are they doing in the preseason. I think that there definitely is a change in speed from what you do in practice versus what you do in a game, right? And we are only four games into the season, but we really are to the point where teams are starting to round into what they're going to be for the duration of the season. And I kind of talked about this on the post game show that in terms of the pass rush, this week we're finally going against a quarterback that's not as mobile, or at least doesn't have the same run tendencies as the last 2-3 quarterbacks we faced. So this is really a good opportunity to see what this defense can look like when they do get that opportunity to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback. Whereas the past couple of games, right, even when you got into those passing situations, you had to be aware of that possibly happening so you don't get burned by Justin Fields for a 40 yards reverse field touchdown. But you're not going to get that with Bryce Young. So you can sell out a little more in terms of the pass rush. In terms of the run defense, I think a lot of that is still just everybody figuring out how to play together, right? Run defense in its essence just comes down to gap integrity. Everybody's got to fill a gap. And just too often to me, it feels like we've got two players in the same gap, and the running backs that we're facing are doing a good job of finding those lanes that are open. So, optimistically, as they continue to work together and keep putting that on film, right? Hopefully those players learn to work together, get those run lanes filled, and cut down on that.
Yeah, when you're talking about, Chuba Hubbard and this Panthers run offense versus the Dolphins run defense, there's actually been something that the Dolphins defense has done well in the run game, and they're limiting the amount of opportunities of outside zone runs. They have a really, really good EP on that. They're the eighth best defense against outside runs or outside zone runs, where it's at the edge of the tackles or right into the C gaps of both tackles on the opposite side of the field. Where they really struggle is inside, where Kenneth Grant, Jordan Phillips, Zach Sealer are supposed to be the solve right there. They are the second worst team, second worst defense against inside zone runs. And that is a big problem. That is a big, big problem. Because guess what? This Panthers offensive line, even with the injury to Robert Hunt and Robert Hunt's replacement, they're on their third string right guard, and they're still able to run inside. Carolina runs inside 62% of the time, which is the seventh most in the NFL. They are, at best, an average inside running team. They do the pin and pulls. They have leverage on the pads. They're able to utilize motion as well with Jatavion Sanders and Tommy Tremble and their 12 personnel packages as well. I believe they run 12 personnel at a 23% rate, which is like 19th 19th most in the NFL, and they're like below average on that in terms of 12 personnel. But with Jatavion Sanders and Tommy Tremble there, they're really going to eat up the linebackers in those short zone coverages. We talked about it since the last 4 weeks. This Dolphins defense gives up the most amount of yards and the most explosive plays when the ball is thrown 1 to 5 yards in that short space. They are the worst team in the NFL in short yardage throws. The Carolina Panthers with Ted McMillan, Jatavion Sanders, Tommy Tremble, Chuba Hubbard, and Bryce Young throwing the ball, they throw it the seventh most in the NFL. Their EPA is probably not the best, but I'll be damned, you're going to try and put Tyrell Dodson in coverage, Jordan Brooks in coverage. You're going to ask Jack Jones to, not play as deep. You're going to ask Minkah Fitzpatrick and Ashton Davis to play one high and crowd the line of scrimmage. Meanwhile, they could throw that deep ball up there when they're continuously throwing those short yardage throws, whether it be the crossers, screens, slants, And they're doing that just so that way they can dial up the deep ball and catch the Dolphins secondary with their pants down.
Yeah, again, I think a lot of what's happened in the beginning of the season, and I think that there's been such a visceral reaction to what the Dolphins secondary could potentially look like in theory and what it did look like on paper at the beginning of the season, that I think so much of the year, from a defensive standpoint, the Dolphins have kind of spent their energy trying to compensate for what they perceived was going to be this glaring weakness. And don't get me wrong, it's certainly not a strength. But I think that they've been a little over aggressive this season defensively, whether it's the run blitzes, whether it's the sending pressure. I think that they've kind of been a little bit over aggressive. I think that the prudent thing here is just trusting your players. You don't want to put too much on them at this point. I think a lot of the stuff that they've done with like the sim pressures, they worked really well against the Jets. But a lot of that relies on, that communication between players on defense. And, this is a system right now, especially with guys in the secondary, where they're getting used to each other. And so, especially when you talk about the run game and the run fits, and it's just, I think there's a lot being put on these guys' plates, and I think it just needs to get back to the basics. Keep it simple right now. As these guys gel and as they grow together, if you want to add more of those, a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Complex concepts into it, then you can do that. But I think right now that I think Anthony Weaver has been a little bit over aggressive in trying to get to the quarterback in order to compensate for what he perceives as a weakness in the secondary.
Even those complex concepts like layered stunts, coffee house stunts, or delayed blitzes, they're not working. I mean, Coach, you talked about the leverage and pad level, especially along the interior. None of that matters, especially if they're not getting pressure up the middle of the offensive line to the quarterback. We talked about it in the post-game show Monday night, where the only holdovers from last year's defense playing major snaps was Jordan Brooks and Zach Sealer. That's pretty much it. And I don't think we can't really fault too much of this onto Anthony Weaver. I think we can point, the finger and more so how the defense was built and the time it was built at. I mean, you bring in Minkah Fitzpatrick midway through training camp. Defensive line, okay. You didn't really have Bradley Chubb at all last year, so he's kind of playing in somewhat of a new system. Jalen Phillips played limited snaps. You have 3 rookies along the defensive line plus Matthew Butler. Those secondary guys, they got brought in training camp. Cam Smith is no longer. Kader Kohu is on IR. Jalen Ramsey was traded, right? Defensive backs coach Matthew Arojo noted that none of the Dolphins' 3 starting cornerbacks were on the roster to start training camp. Now, Jack Jones now after week 4 looks decent. Rasul Douglas looks great. Somehow Cornell Armstrong is brought in. But if you hear these media pressers with Anthony Weaver, Matthew Arujo, and even the linebacker coach, Joe Barry, they're not pointing at each other's coaches. They're not pointing at the players. They're maneuvering and subtly saying that it was roster management because these players are still gelling together. You take a look at the top defenses in the NFL, it's the same DC from the last 2-3 years, and the players are also the same. You take a look at Denver, you take a look at Buffalo, and Buffalo's run defense is worse than the Dolphins' run defense, and yet they can still get stops.
Yeah, I think, like you said, that comes down to continuity. It's a word we've used a lot here. But I think that, when you talk about what Anthony Weaver's been doing in terms of, trying more of those pressures that aren't necessarily getting home, I think it's one of those deals that, if we're going to sit back and play based defenses and still get gashed, right, then you got to try to do something. And I think that's kind of where Anthony Weaver was, at least early in the season, just trying to outsmart the coordinator on the other side, trying to come up with one of those big plays to get them in a situation that eventually turns the ball over, whether it's a long third down that turns into a punt or a sack, the interception. Those obviously haven't happened yet. But in the same sense, the way we've been talking about a lot of the different players having opportunities to get right against the Panthers, I think that could also be the case for Anthony Weaver and the defense. When you look at the receiving threats on the Panthers, Tet McMillan is the only one that has over 100 yards receiving in the season. So you can go out and you can kind of mix it up. You can put Rasul Douglas on him because McMillan did not run a great 40. He's not going to run away from him on the field. You can put the little scrappy Jack Jones on him sometimes, right? Not all the time, right? But you can mix it up with that and feel decent about your one-on-one scenario. But then the rest of it, you can kind of play a more of a base defense and let these guys understand their different coverages, understand different leverages, right? Figure out how to work together. It's not like you have to defend 3, 4, 5 weapons on the offense that you have to be trying to guess which one they're going to go to. Right now, I mean, Chuba Hubbard is solid, but he doesn't worry me even as much as the Jets running game did, to be honest. So really going into this game, there is one player that I feel like they need to stop on the Panthers offense. And if you can limit Tet McMillan, then I think you're going to be in good shape for the rest of the game. If it's somebody else that comes out and has a big game and beats them, then you tip their hat. But that's the player that I feel that we have to focus on and then play around that.
Yeah, I think this game comes down to, for the Dolphins, can they hold up on the inside of the defensive line and their own offensive line? Like, if the Dolphins offense is able to get their running game going efficiently, I think that's game right there. And if the Dolphins can blitz effectively, not all the time, but if they blitz effectively and they get home and limit those inside runs for Chuba Hubbard, they should be able to control this game. My only fear is that if they can't get pressure, they are going to pick on Jordan Brooks and Tyrell Dodson in the middle of the field. Look, they might be the leading tacklers in the NFL right now, but there's a reason they're the leading tacklers in the NFL right now, because no one else can properly cover and no one else can properly tackle. And if they have to cover the defensive backs or pass rushers' deficiency, it's going to feel like the end of the Jets game for the Dolphins, especially on the road. Now, we'll wrap it up with a prediction. Eric, what do you see the outcome of this game looking like?
You get 200 scrimmage yards from Devon Achane. That's my big prediction in this one. 200 scrimmage yards from Achane. Dolphins win 27-20. I'm going down with the ship with the 4 guys up front on defense. I think you sack Bryce Young 3 times.
Yeah, and I'm going to say I think we have a big day running the ball. Let's say we get 150 running the ball. I think that it's a game that we get out to a multiple score lead and that we maintain it. Not gonna call for a 70-point game, right? But a 24-14, for example, I think would still be a great result in this game.
I don't know. I really don't have this much faith in this defense, and the Dolphins offense is going to be asked to score a lot. And I think they'll be stopped a couple of times just because they're still on the road. They're still trying to figure out how to operate in an actual real life game scenario without Tyreek Hill. I mean, what better place to do it than up against this Panthers defense, I would say, but they're on the road. Things happen to the Dolphins on the road, whether it be, mistakes on penalties, someone not lined up correctly, albeit I will say we have not seen a lot of that this season. So, thank God, knock on wood. But I think this is going to be a tough, grinded out game where Carolina roars back. And I think it becomes a 23-20 Carolina win. I don't have that much faith right now in this Dolphins team. I'll just leave it at that.
Fair.
Yeah. As always, y'all stick with us here on the 3 Yards Per Carry Podcast Network, part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. As always, go Fins.